The only way to grow your business is that if you actually think of it as a business. This isn't just a craft that you're good at that you're gonna sell and charge money for. This is literally a business, and you have to think about it as such. I think one of the reasons that most creative entrepreneurs can't get past their glass ceiling, can't break through to the next level is because they're not treating it like a business. If you are a solopreneur or a freelancer, it's even more difficult because you're very good at your creative craft, but thinking about it as an actual business is something that us as creatives aren't naturally good at. As a business owner, you want to grow, right? And so in this video and in the next video, we're going to be talking about growth. Every business that I work with, they are constantly looking at their business and they're working on their business, not just in their business. And so, okay, well, what does working on your business look like? It looks like identifying areas of growth. And so about a year and a half ago, I was listening to the best, I think it's one of the best podcasts out there on leadership, if not the best, and it's the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today and in the next video is basically just ripped off from that podcast, and I applied it to our own business. And so I'm always learning and listening to things. And the way Craig Groeschel was talking about growth, he talked about it in two parts. So I'm going to talk to you about it in two parts and the way it's actually been applied to Butler. The first part, he talked about hindrances to growth. So the things that are actually growth killers in your organization. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then next week, we'll be talking about things that are going to be growth drivers. It's important before you talk about, okay, what are the things that I need to actively be doing to drive growth? You need to identify the things that are going to hinder or kill your growth. And in his podcast, he identified 4 things, which I'm going to be talking about the same 4 things, but I'm applying them to how I've implemented them in Butler. And so he talked about the 4 things as being unnecessary complexity, unscalable processes, unhealthy mindsets, and underdeveloped leaders. And so I'll talk a little bit about each one of those. So we'll talk about first unnecessary complexities. Now with business, just the nature of business, there's going to be necessary complexities. It's complex. There's a million different things you're juggling at one time. And so there is complexity just embedded in business just by virtue of having a business. And so what hinders growth is unnecessary complexity. So the things that are complexities that they just shouldn't be there. And so you have to think about it like, okay, how many touch points do I need to make with the client in order to get something done? How many people need to be involved in this process in order to push a project through? How long is this project going to take? And how many processes need to be set in place? And so a lot of people, again, I'm a process guy. I love having our processes documented, but sometimes the processes are so complex with so many unnecessary steps, and it forces people to become micromanaged towards like, are we checking every little box to get the things done? And so if you're growing and you're moving, you can't really have time to sit there and check every single little box. So you have to think about your processes too. And we talk about processes, unscalable processes, but embedded in there are your processes and the way you're doing things, is there any unnecessary complexity embedded into it? The second thing he talked about was unscalable processes. Right, so it kind of goes hand in hand with unnecessary complexity, but the unscalable process is whatever it took you to get to where you are, the processes that took you to get to where you are aren't necessarily the same processes that are going to take you to where you need to be. So we started Butler in 2012, which means that I am 10 years into this, as of this year. And so, the things that I've learned along the way, I started with a process in mind that quickly changed, and then as we started adding employees, as we started working with bigger clients, our processes had to change. And so the processes that I started with are not the same processes that we ended up with. And so you're going to have to kind of recheck your processes. I do this at least once a year. So I look at our processes and I look at, where we are as a business, and there's a whole different level level of dealing with project management, for example, if you have $100,000 revenue compared to if you have a $500,000 revenue, compared to if you have a $1 million revenue. So you're going to run your business a little bit differently. And so the first question you have to ask yourself is, do you even have a process? So if before you address the question of, is my process unscalable, is do you even have a clearly defined process? If not, then start there. Like, get a pad and a paper out and just write down your process from start to finish. What is it going to look like to serve your clients? And then the second question is, okay, how often are you rechecking your process? A lot of times, especially as having employees, my employees might come to me and say, hey, Sean, whatever we're doing isn't working. We need to change our process. And when I hear that, I don't automatically say, okay, we need to change our process. I ask two questions. One is, does our process actually need to be changed? Or are we even following the process in the first place? So I have to have a process written down, like this is the Butler way of doing things. And if stuff feels like it's not working, or we feel overwhelmed, or there's unnecessary complexity, whatever it might be, I go back and say, okay, are we actually following the process that we laid out? Because I'm not going to change the process if we're not actually working the process. Okay, so first write it out, then you have to commit yourself to following the process, and then hold yourself accountable to see if you're even following it. And so the way we've started implementing this at Butler is to have more frequent touch-base meetings as we're working on a project. And so we have an initial sprint planning session, and that's where, so we take a project, we split it up into different phases or sprints, and at the beginning of the sprint, we plan out what's going to happen, and then at the end of the sprint, we do a review. Did we follow the process? What went well? What didn't go well? And we're documenting. And so we're having more frequent touch-base meetings along the way, so it's not like we're getting halfway through the project and saying like, hey, whatever we're doing is not working. So we have a process written down, we're holding ourselves accountable to following the process, and then we are doing frequent touch bases to see if the process needs to actually be changed. So the first growth killer is unnecessary complexity. Simple is better. The second growth killer is unscalable processes, things that are hindering you from going to the next level. And then the third growth killer is unhealthy mindsets. This is a super difficult one to try to push through your culture if you have multiple employees. It's easier if it's just yourself. You're like, okay, I need to be self-aware. That's the first thing, right? And even getting to that point can be a challenge, because most people, I think, are not self-aware. They don't reflect, what am I really good at? What am I really bad at? What am I weak at? What is an area of growth that I should be focusing on? And what is my just like naturally going to be weak at that I shouldn't focus on, that I should leverage my strengths? And so I think being self-aware is really important. A lot of people don't do that. And so we start to develop unhealthy mindsets. And an unhealthy mindset would be one of a lack of accountability, meaning you're blame shifting, you're not taking ownership. It drives me nuts when people do that, because I'm taking ownership, right? At the end of the day, if a client has an issue with something and it's a bad reflection from our company, even though it might not be my fault, right? If someone on my team messed up or whatever it is, it might not be my fault, but it's definitely my responsibility. That's my company, that's my employees, my quality assurance measures. And so a lack of accountability or a lack of taking ownership, that's an unhealthy mindset. Another aspect of an unhealthy mindset is a fixed mindset, meaning like, I don't really need to grow. I'm good at what I do. I know what I'm talking about. I don't need to invest in myself anymore. So it's just fixed. You're going to be stuck. And, I tell my team all the time is that like, hey, Butler is growing. We are growing. And even though what got you here, the level of knowledge and skill that it took to get you here is not necessarily the level of knowledge and skill that you need to stay here, because as we grow as a company, we might outgrow you. So you need to make sure that you are personally growing and developing as the company grows. And that happens all the time. People who are rockstar employees one day, 5 years later, are no longer rockstar employees. Why? Because the company has grown and they've outgrown the individual, and the individual needs to grow. So if you have a fixed mindset, it's going to hinder you from growing. And so you have to make sure that we have not a fixed mindset, but a growth mindset. Another unhealthy mindset is an ungrateful mindset. This one also gets me, again, it's easier to spot in yourself and just correct it. It's a little bit more difficult when you have a team, but an ungrateful mindset, well, you start to notice that when you start to complain about your clients, when you start to complain about your projects, when you say that, oh my gosh, this client's calling again, yeah, they got this issue. Now, look, there are some clients that are just bad clients. They're not a good fit for who you are and where you're trying to go. But if you find yourself more and more blaming the clients, blaming the projects, doing all this stuff, you have an ungrateful mindset. The reality is that these are people who have an issue, they have a challenge, and they didn't know where to go, and they met you. And through whatever conversation and persuasion you've done, you've convinced them that you can help them solve their challenges, and they see a value on that, and they're paying you to be able to do this. So they're trusting their business, their livelihoods to you, and they're saying like, look, I trust you to do this. And so if there is a relational breakdown, or if the client seems to be a little bit more difficult, you have to go back to the beginning, say like, okay, let me put myself in this person's shoes and have a little bit of empathy, right? And so empathize with them, and it's another part of how a healthy mindset is empathy, but also gratitude. So I'm grateful that this person entrusted me, and it's not that I have to work on their stuff, because I get to do this. I have prayed about wanting to do creative services and charge for this, and now I'm doing it. And so like your issues that you have might be something that you were praying for one day. And so just make sure you maintain that mindset of gratitude, not ungratitude. And so unnecessary complexity, unscalable processes, unhealthy mindsets, and then the last thing is underdeveloped leaders. Now, if you are a solopreneur and you're by yourself or you're a freelancer, you are the leader, right? And so your lack of development will actually hinder you from growing. And so again, that goes with the mindset thing, but what are the things that you're intentionally doing to personally grow as a leader? I think all of this, again, starts with self-awareness, being aware of who you are, what your strengths are, what you're really good at, and what you're weak at. Sometimes you need to work on your weaknesses. Sometimes there are things that you need to like smooth out the rough edges. Other times it's about recognizing your weaknesses and leveraging those by either delegating or outsourcing, and then going all in on your strengths. And so you have to be self-aware, and then continue to develop as a leader. So developing as a leader, I know what I'm gifted at. I'm gifted at speaking. I'm gifted at teaching. I'm gifted at client relations. And so I know that, okay, when it comes to those things, how am I going to grow and become even better? So I'm still to this day buying courses. I'm consuming content. I'm reading books. I'm changing our processes. I'm learning all these things. Why? Because I want to continue to grow and I don't want to stagnate. And I'm encouraging my team to do the same thing. So there are some questions that I want you to leave with this video. Again, the next week's video, we're going to talk about, okay, now that we've identified the killers of growth, what are the things that are actually going to drive growth from my business? But as we're talking about the killers of growth, the growth killers, questions that I want to leave you with is, what creates complexity? All right. So look at the way you operate in business. Look at the way you're doing things. What are the things that are creating complexity? Another way of asking that is, what are the barriers to simplicity? Right? What does simple look like, and what is the barrier hindering you from operating with simplicity? Another question is, what is something you're going to do to enhance organizational simplicity? So you've identified what's stopping you from being simple, what is adding to complexity, and what are you going to do to encourage simplicity? Another question regarding efficiency is, where are there areas of inefficiency in your processes? Where is an area of inefficiency? And then what systems and processes do you have in place to encourage efficiency? So what are your processes to encourage that? And then also, what do your processes need to actually be changed? Okay, are you following the process, or does the process needs to be changed? So do you have accountability measures set in place to where you can hold yourself accountable to see if you're following the process? And then if you are, and it's still not working, what part of the process actually needs to be changed? When it comes to mindset and leadership growth and development, how are you going to grow as a leader? So write that question out. Again, for me, it's being self-aware. What am I good at? But also identifying what I'm weak at. I know I'm weak at organization. I'm not good at it. I'm like super, like my brain is scatterbrain. And I get it. Like when it was just me, I had to lean in and work on my organizational skills. As we started getting a little bit busier, I had budget to hire, and I prioritized hiring organized people. That's why I have a project manager and 2 account managers, is because they're the ones who takes the strategy, the creativity, and they can actually manage it, make it organized. And then I can help set up the processes for that. So how are you going to grow as a leader? It's identifying your strengths, identifying your weaknesses, figuring out how you're going to grow in your strengths and leverage your weaknesses. And then if you have a team, I want you to ask yourself, how are you guys going to grow together? One of the things that we do at Butler is we have a monthly all staff meeting, and that's where we do an aspect of leadership training and development. We remind ourselves of our core values. We also talk about an event or an activity that we can do to grow together, and then identify areas of growth and maybe books and things to go through as a team. And so if you have a team, how are you going to grow together? So that's it for today. Those are the killers of growth. In the next video, we're going to talk about the growth drivers. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Make sure this content gets out to more people. And if you are a creative entrepreneur and you're looking to level up, maybe you feel stuck, learn from my mistakes. At agency.butlerbranding.com, we have a free webinar that talks about everything I've learned in scaling Butler Branding since we started in 2012. I'm talking about everything I've learned from brand positioning, marketing, sales, strategy, and project management. So learn to level up for free at agency.butlerbranding.com.